A vigil in defiance. For the first time, Hong Kong bans its annual event to remember the Tiananmen Square massacre. It comes as China prepares to impose national security laws on the semi-autonomous territory. So will the city's democracy movement survive? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Hong Kong has held a candlelit vigil to remember the Tiananmen Square massacre every year for the past 3 decades. It's one of only 2 territories in China, the other is Macau, where people can openly commemorate the Chinese army's crackdown on democracy protests in 1989. But this year, for the first time, the memorial has been banned in both places. Police in Hong Kong cited the coronavirus outbreak and restrictions on mass gatherings. But some still defied the ban and gathered in the city's Victoria Park. Vigil organisers say the ban is an excuse to limit dissent.
This is totally political motivated. So when you look at Hong Kong, everything business as normal. When you go to the subway, it's far more congested than any political gathering in Hong Kong. So it's an excuse on the part of police to clamp down on Hong Kong gathering, including the June 4th candlelight vigil, but also because they have announced the national security law, they are also afraid of protests against the national security law. So it's very obviously the whole thing is political motivated.
It's all happening at a politically sensitive time. On the same day, Hong Kong's Legislative Council passed a law criminalising disrespect of China's national anthem. Anyone found guilty could be fined and jailed for up to 3 years. And last week, the central government in Beijing bypassed the council and approved plans for national security laws specifically for the territory. Pro-democracy activists are worried about their future, as Sarah Clark explains from Hong Kong.
We've had thousands gather in Victoria Park. This was an area that was sealed off by the police earlier today for a police ban. The government enforced social distancing rules and banned for the first time in 31 years this candlelit vigil for people in Hong Kong to mark the massacre of Tiananmen Square 31 years ago. But as you can see behind me, the people have gathered anyway, and we've heard chanting of slogans of Free Hong Kong, Liberate Hong Kong, One Country, One Nation. We've also got a number of flags calling for independence in Hong Kong. And of course, the organisers here encourage people to come and show their opinions about the democracy. Basically, the pro-democracy organisations are here and gather every year. Now, last year we saw about 180,000 people gather in Victoria Park. This year we've still seen thousands despite that police ban. Now, the organisers, however, are concerned about the future of rallies like this, and that's as a result of the national security laws. China's going to introduce those laws and potentially target political dissidents or those people who speak out against the mainland. And they're worried about the future of big assemblies and gatherings like this, and that includes the Tiananmen Square candlelit vigil, which has been held for the last 30 years here in Hong Kong.
Let's bring in our guest. And in Hong Kong, we have Emily Lau, a member of the Democratic Party. In Beijing, Andy Mock, a senior research fellow at the Centre for China and Globalization. And in London, Roderick Wai, associate fellow, Asia-Pacific programme at Chatham House. Welcome to you all. Emily Lau, first of all, the Tiananmen Vigil was always the event that most visibly demonstrated, perhaps, that Hong Kong is different from the mainland. What effect does banning it have?
Well, in fact, I mean, the ban was not 100% successful. As you might have seen, there were probably thousands of people going into the park, and I guess the police did not use violence to clear them. But it is very sad, because for 30 years, Hong Kong was able to hold this candlelight vigil, and sometimes attended by over 100,000 people, always very peaceful and orderly. And now this year, I think the national security law is going to be imposed on us soon. And under the banner of the pandemic, the authorities decided to not allow the vigil to go ahead. It is sending a very, very negative signal to the Hong Kong people, to mainland China, and the rest of the world, that our freedoms they're diminishing very fast.
OK. Andy, as Emily Lau says, it's sad, isn't it? The Tiananmen Vigil showed to the world that one country, two systems worked, that Beijing was willing to tolerate that sort of protest. And now it's not.
I'm not sure I would use sad to describe this. We need to recognize that that it's been many, many years since 1997. Hong Kong has changed, China has changed, the world has changed. And we are in a very challenging time in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that from a public health perspective, from a perspective of responsible governance, this makes sense. That being said, I don't disagree with Emily's point that there are structural secular changes going on in Hong Kong as well. Both of these things can be true. I would just point out, too, that in 1997, there was a lot of pessimism and skepticism after the handover, how things would turn out. And I don't think it turned out anywhere near as bad as people feared. And similarly today, the Chinese perspective on this is, of course, that this is a loophole. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed for the good of the people of Hong Kong. It needs to be fixed from the overall system of China with this one country, two systems framework as well. So I wouldn't use sad. I would say, yes, things have changed, and let's see where we are a year or two from now. I would perhaps be a little bit more optimistic.
Roderick, does banning the vigil is another nail in the coffin for Hong Kong? Is it a symbol that one country, two systems isn't working?
I think these are all sort of big statements to make from it. I think I totally agree with Emily. It is sad that this was banned, and it does send a bad message. On top of a whole load of other bad messages, that things are getting much more difficult in Hong Kong for people to be able to express freely their views on matters relating to Hong Kong itself and to what has happened on the mainland. And this is now being reinforced by this rush through, so it would appear, a new law by the national security law by the People's Republic of China. They now say it's going to be ready in a month or so. There's no time for consultation, no time for proper examination of the wording of the law, and I think this again is another very sad and disturbing feature of what is happening at the moment.
Emily, back in 2003, when Tung Chee-hwa tried to push through national security legislation, it was stopped because of huge demonstrations in Hong Kong. You at the time said that you didn't want Tung Chee-hwa being sacked by Beijing, but you didn't want Beijing to interfere. But now it is. Looking back, should you have let that legislation pass at that time? You've got a better chance of influencing it.
Not really. I mean, at that time, that bill was opposed by many people. But I think there were suggestions, particularly by the legal fraternity, saying that the government should publish a white paper to consult the people more broadly, or maybe refer it to the Law Reform Commission. So there was the sense that people understood that it is in the basic law. The Hong Kong SAR should enact legislation on its own, but you have to do it in a way that you have proper consultation, then you make compromises, then you come up with a consensus. But they never went down that road. So it's very, very sad. And then the more they talk about it, it made people more scared that if they make the law, it will be there to punish them, to turn Hong Kong into a police state. So the whole thing has been very, very badly handled.
Andy, this is the refrain you often hear, that Hong Kong people are scared because things are being imposed on them. These new rules, the new legislation will be written by the Standing Committee in Beijing. There's no consultation with Hong Kong. That is the problem, isn't it?
I'm not sure I would describe it as a problem. So I think these questions about process, certainly I think reasonable people can disagree. Is something rushed? Has adequate consultation been allowed. But let's not forget too that any process, there always will be discontents, complaining there was not enough consultation, etc. And the main point of governance is to serve the people. So while perhaps there are legitimate criticisms of how it's handled, I think what really matters is, does it make Hong Kong a safer place, a place better for business? Does it create hope for the people of Hong Kong going forward? And we've seen over the last year, certainly, that the people of Hong Kong have suffered, some individuals grievously, being set on fire, being attacked, businesses being destroyed. And this really cannot continue, I think. So let's see. The proof is in the pudding, I believe is an English saying, that if this solves the problem, it really wouldn't have mattered if some people felt there was not enough consultation.
Roderick, did Hong Kong and its political leaders miss a trick by not getting this national security legislation through on its own terms, and is now going to be faced with something much stricter?
They would have found it very, very difficult. But as Emily says, there are processes in Hong Kong that could have been gone through, and they weren't. The Chinese central government decided that they would push through this law on their own, by themselves, without any serious consultation with the people of Hong Kong. And just in terms of China's own legislative processes, this is being pushed through at record speed. Most legislation takes considerably longer to be examined by the National People's Congress. And if this comes in a month or so, as we are now being told it will, that is a really hurried, pushed-through legislation. And to go back to Andy's point about making Hong Kong safer, I don't think it necessarily does make Hong Kong safer. It makes a lot of people in Hong Kong feel a great deal less safe. And again, on the point of business, it is remarkable and saddening, again, to see the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank being forced to make a public statement of support for the national security law. This is not the purview of business to be getting into the politics like that. And again, it just shows the general push by the People's Republic of China to ensure compliance in Hong Kong at all levels.
Emily Li Keqiang, China's premier, he says the law will provide for the steady implementation of one country, two systems. It's not in mainland China's interest, surely, to see Hong Kong crumble, is it? With the access to capital markets, with business confidence in the legal system, all those arguments we've heard before as to why it needs to succeed.
Well, one would think so. But if you mean now, we're waiting for the details of the law to come out. And if the law is very harsh, if it's just like the national security law in mainland China, then I can assure you, not just ordinary Hong Kong people, the business people who were so frightened of the extradition bill last year, and the professionals, I think they would be very scared if we have a full-fledged mainland national security law imposed on us. And you know what they do to people who are guilty of such offenses? They would be disappeared for years. No access to family members, no access to lawyers. They would be tortured. And when finally there's a trial, it would be held in camera. Nobody would be allowed in. And then it come out, okay, give you 10 years. Where's the judgment? No judgment. This is complete lawlessness. And if they impose this on Hong Kong, and you tell me that international business community would want to come and do business here, and the Hong Kong people will lay their hearts at ease and say, yeah, we can carry on living here happily. Come on.
Andy, that's it, isn't it? One of the crown jewels of Hong Kong is its legal system based on the common law. The Chinese Communist Party has no experience of a legal system like that, is not interested in a legal system like that. It will damage confidence in Hong Kong.
Well, I think we have to see, I mean, certainly Emily's depiction of the Chinese legal system, I think, is perhaps a touch dramatic and exaggerated. Certainly, the procedures are different. But let's look at this also, that if the Chinese legal system was indeed as horrific and as bad for business as she claims, why would so many foreign businesses still continue to do business and even to step up their investments in China? I don't dispute that there is a lot of concern and fear in Hong Kong, but I think some of these negative feelings have been manipulated, exacerbated by the Western media. There is a symbiotic relationship, I think, to doing this. And again, what I say is, let's see where we are in a year.
OK, folks, a short pause for a moment. The United Kingdom handed over control of Hong Kong to China in 1997. The territory was guaranteed a high degree of autonomy for 50 years. Now, Britain says it will offer millions of Hong Kong residents a path to UK citizenship.
Mr. Speaker, if China follows through with its proposed legislation, we will put in place new arrangements to allow BNOs to come to the UK without the current 6-month limit, enabling them to live and apply to study and work for extendable periods of 12 months, thereby also providing a pathway to citizenship. Mr. Speaker, let me just finish by saying that even at this stage, I sincerely hope China will reconsider its approach. But if not, the UK will not just look the other way when it comes to the people of Hong Kong.
Now, China's government has rejected the comments as gross interference.
The UK has no sovereignty, governance or supervision over Hong Kong after its return. Therefore, the British side has no right to cite the Sino-British Joint Declaration to make irresponsible remarks on Hong Kong affairs and interfere in China's internal affairs.
So, Roderick, as China drafts this law, is there any sort of leverage from the international community that could work, that could maybe temper it in any way?
What we are seeing, I think it makes it most unlikely that there will be any change of the Chinese determination to push this law through. The news that has come out in the last day or so makes it quite clear that they want it in place by July the 1st. And that doesn't really give time for any international pressure of any kind. And there has been widespread expressions of concern in Europe and in other places, in the United States, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all these places. And the US, of course, has sort of said that they don't believe that Hong Kong is fully autonomous anymore and that there may be consequences of that decision. But all this pressure at the moment does not seem to be staying the Chinese hand in any way.
Emily, is there any way of mitigating how China might draft this law? Does the offer of a path to citizenship from the UK, sanctions from the US, help from Australia, does that make any difference to how Beijing thinks, do you think? Does it help your cause?
Well, I don't know how the Communist Party thinks, but I certainly hope the international community will continue to speak out, because the China human rights lawyers have told me, they said, don't believe it if people tell you China does not care about international public opinion, because Beijing does care, because they care about faith. So anyway, I hope they will all speak out. But if Xi Jinping is so hell-bent on doing these things and to frighten the Hong Kong people and others, then I hope that Britain will offer a lifeboat to the Hong Kong people. And other countries, I hope they will have some immigration policy which will help Hong Kong people. Because I remember in the last century, when the Vietnamese boat people, they floated out and they came to Hong Kong. We were the first port of call, and they came and we offer asylum to them. And the UK government actually went to the United Nations to call for an international conference on resettling the Vietnamese refugees. I hope that will not happen to Hong Kong.
Andy, is there a risk, or does the mainland government fear a brain drain from Hong Kong? Is it threatened? Is it worried about the British government giving asylum, if you like, to BNO passport holders to Australia and the US doing similar sort of thing?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. Certainly, I think Hong Kong, as it is currently configured in terms of its human capital, certainly is of value to China. However, if there are any changes, I think that there's certainly no shortage of talented people in the mainland, people overseas, whether these are ethnic Chinese, whether they're non-Chinese, that would also be interested in the opportunities that Hong Kong offers. So Hong Kong, as a standalone entity, of course, has value, but as it becomes integrated into the Greater Bay Area, I think the opportunities will only become greater. And to the degree that people in Hong Kong are uncomfortable with the new environment, I'm sure many other talented people will be ready to take their place.
And Roderick, what message is this sending to Taiwan? Because one country, two systems was held up as an example of how Taiwan could reintegrate with the mainland. Has Beijing given up on the idea of peaceful unification?
Those are sort of two very big questions. First of all, I think the whole concept of one country, two systems has long been of no interest to Taiwan or the people in Taiwan or the government in Taiwan or anyone very much there. So that, from that perspective, what happens in Hong Kong is, especially if it's seen to be further strengthening of the hand of the PRC in the governance of Hong Kong, that is going to make Taiwan even less willing to come to some kind of political arrangement with the PRC, because it demonstrates that they can't be trusted. There is a joint declaration that spoke of a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong. There was Article 23, which spoke of Hong Kong introducing this legislation on its own, and this is just not happening. China is imposing this new national security law on Hong Kong. Secondly, as far as peaceful unification is concerned, that's a very different set of questions, and that we just do not know at the moment. At the moment, China still, by and large, holds to the mantra of peaceful reunification, as they term it. But there has been no real movement in developing a political relationship with Taiwan in the last few years, and it's not likely to happen.
Okay. Emily, you've been an advocate for Hong Kong and democratic principles in Hong Kong for long before the handover. Don't you find this exhausting? I mean, where do you go from here? The Chinese Communist Party is much bigger than you and those people who you work with.
Well, I don't look like an exhausted person, do I? And as somebody said to me recently, well, why give up a habit of a lifetime? It's a struggle of a lifetime. And it is something I believe in. It's an ideal, it's in principle. And I just don't want to be walked all over by these big powers, whether it was the UK or the Chinese Communist Party or anybody else. You know, there's a thing called human decency. We have to stand up for what we believe in. And so I'm not tired, I'm not exhausted, and neither are the Hong Kong people. Many of us are going to continue to fight.
Okay, and Andy, very quickly, should there be a vigil in Hong Kong next year to commemorate the Tiananmen massacre?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, I think there will be a number of factors to consider, including public health issues. I think other issues have to be considered as well. Let's wait and see.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you to all our guests, to Emily Lau, to Andy Mock, and to Roderick Wye. And thank you too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story, and I'm at Jazeera Bernard. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.